There is a specific kind of silence that only arrives after someone stops trying. Not the silence of an argument, not the silence of distance. The silence that comes after the last message has been sent, the last call has gone unanswered, and a person who once begged for your attention simply stops. And it is in that silence, not before it, that your worth finally becomes visible. This is the story of what happens when you walk away for good. Not in anger, not in cruelty, but in quiet, permanent decision. And why the people who once overlooked, you will spend the rest of their lives understanding too late exactly what they lost. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand why Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca all agreed on one uncomfortable truth. The moment you stop chasing your own value in someone else's eyes is the exact moment they are finally forced to see it. Welcome to Wisdom of the Stoics, ancient wisdom for the modern mind. This is the channel where 2,000 years of philosophy meet the problems you are actually facing today. No fluff, no empty motivation. Just the tested, battle-hardened thinking of men who buried children, lost empires, faced exile, and stared down death, and still found a way to live with dignity. If you are new here, welcome. Every week we take the writings of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, and we translate them into something you can use tomorrow morning. Consider subscribing and turning on notifications, because the ideas in this video are going to challenge how you think about love, respect, and self-worth, and you will not want to miss what comes next on this channel. Now, let's talk about walking away. The illusion of presence. There is a strange arithmetic in human relationships. We assume that being present, showing up, staying, proving, explaining, forgiving is what earns us value in someone else's eyes. We believe that if we simply stay long enough, love hard enough, endure enough, the other person will eventually wake up and see us clearly. This is one of the most persistent illusions of modern life, and it is precisely backwards. Epictetus, a man born into slavery who later became one of Rome's most respected philosophers, built his entire teaching around a single dividing line. There are things within your control and things outside of it. Your effort, your character, your patience, these are yours. But another person's awareness of your worth, that was never yours to control. You cannot think it into existence in someone else's mind. You cannot cry it into being. You cannot over-explain your way into being valued. And yet so many of us spend years trying exactly that, treating our own worth as something we must convince someone else of, rather than something that simply is, whether they see it or not. Let me tell you about a woman named Elena. Elena's story, the woman who stopped explaining. Elena was 34 years old when she finally understood what Epictetus had been trying to tell the world for 2,000 years. For 6 years, she had been in a relationship with a man named David. On paper, nothing was dramatically wrong. He didn't shout. He didn't disappear for days. He simply deprioritized her in 1,000 small, deniable ways. He would forget the anniversary and then act mildly amused that she remembered. He would make plans with friends and mention her attendance as an afterthought, if at all. When she spoke about her day, his eyes would drift to his phone, and when she noticed and grew quiet, he would ask, almost bored, "What?" "I'm listening." She wasn't being abused. She was being erased slowly, one small omission at a time. And so Elena did what so many of us do. She tried harder. She planned elaborate evenings to remind him why they fell in love. She brought up her feelings gently, then more directly, then eventually with tears, hoping that if she could just find the right combination of words, he would finally see her the way he used to. Each time he would soften for a week, bring her flowers, say the right things, and then inevitably the fog would return, and she would be back to being background noise in her own relationship. Here is the part of the story that matters most. Elena was not lacking in worth. She was accomplished, a senior architect at a respected firm, admired by colleagues, adored by her friends, close to her family. The problem was never that she wasn't valuable. The problem was that she had made her value contingent on David's recognition of it. She had, without realizing it, outsourced her sense of worth to a man who had grown too comfortable to look up. One evening, after a birthday dinner he forgot to plan, and then apologized for with visible irritation at having to apologize at all. Elena sat alone in her car outside the restaurant. She didn't cry. She felt something stranger, a kind of stillness, a clarity. She thought of a line she had read months earlier, one that had lodged itself somewhere she hadn't fully understood until that moment. Marcus Aurelius, writing privately to himself, reminded himself again and again that he could not control the opinions of others, only the integrity of his own actions. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one. Elena realized she had spent 6 years arguing with David, with herself, about what she deserved, hoping the argument itself would eventually produce the result she wanted. But an argument for your worth, repeated long enough, starts to sound like a plea, and a plea, however dignified, changes how you are seen. It teaches the other person that your presence is guaranteed, regardless of how they treat it. So she stopped, not with a speech, not with an ultimatum designed to provoke a reaction. She simply, quietly began removing herself. She stopped initiating plans. She stopped over-explaining her hurt. She stopped performing patience for a man who had come to expect it as background scenery. And within 3 weeks, she had moved out. David did not react at first. That is the part almost no one expects, and it is the part we need to sit with honestly. Because Stoicism is not a fairy tale. It does not promise that walking away produces an immediate, satisfying reaction. For the first month, David seemed almost relieved, telling mutual friends that he needed space to think. Elena, to her credit, did not check in. She did not send the test messages so many of us send. The just wanted to see how you're doing text that is really asking, do you miss me yet? She simply lived. She rebuilt her routines. She reconnected with the parts of her life David's low-grade neglect had slowly crowded out. Her painting, her long weekend hikes, dinners with the friends she'd stopped calling because she was always managing his moods. It was in month 3 that something shifted. David reached out, first casually, then with increasing frequency. He wanted to catch up. He mentioned, almost in passing, that the apartment felt different without her energy in it. He started remembering details from conversations they'd had years earlier, details Elena herself had half forgotten. He began for the first time in years to court her. And here is the uncomfortable, essential truth of this story. David wasn't lying when he finally told her, months later, that he hadn't understood what he had. He genuinely hadn't. Not because Elena's worth had changed. It hadn't, not one particle of it. What had changed was that her absence had removed the illusion of permanence that had let him take her for granted. Presence, when guaranteed, becomes invisible. Absence makes visible what presence could never prove. Elena did not go back, not out of spite, but because she had done something far more important than win an argument about her own worth. She had stopped needing him to win it for her. If you have ever found yourself over-explaining your worth to someone who should have simply been able to see it, tell me in the comments. You are not alone, and this story is more common than you think. Why absence reveals what presence cannot. Why does this pattern repeat itself? Across centuries, across cultures, across every kind of relationship, romantic, familial, professional, even friendships. Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius nearly 2,000 years ago, observed something about human perception that modern psychology has only recently caught up with. We are creatures who measure value not by what something is, but by what it costs us. And nothing reveals true cost like sudden absence. Think about your own life for a moment. Think of your health. Most people do not think about the miracle of breathing freely until a cold makes each breath a labor. They do not appreciate a functioning knee until it aches on the stairs. Seneca wrote extensively about how we squander what is present precisely, because presence feels infinite. until it isn't. The same law governs people. When someone is a fixture in your life, always available, always forgiving, always the one who calls back first, apologizes first, shows up first, the brain files them under constant, and the human brain, for better or worse, does not allocate much attention to constants. We notice change, we notice loss, we notice absence. We do not, as a rule, notice steady presence, because steady presence asks nothing of our awareness. It simply is in the background like oxygen. This is not a character flaw unique to the people who take others for granted, though it certainly can become one when left unexamined. It is a feature of how attention itself works. And this is precisely why walking away, genuinely, completely, without performance, accomplishes something that 1,000 conversations cannot. It converts a constant into a variable, and variables, unlike constants, demand to be noticed. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, who wrote his private reflections not for an audience, but as a form of self-discipline, understood something crucial about this dynamic. He never advised walking away as a strategy to manipulate someone into appreciating you. That would be, in Stoic terms, an attachment to an external outcome you cannot control, trying to walk away in order to produce. A reaction is still, at its core, seeking validation just through a more sophisticated route. The Stoic walks away for a different, more honest reason, because remaining in a place where you are consistently undervalued is a betrayal of your own reason and dignity. The byproduct, that the other person may finally see your worth, is exactly that, a byproduct, not the goal. And this distinction matters more than it might first appear, because it is the difference between walking away as manipulation and walking away as integrity. One is fragile and collapses the moment. The other person doesn't react the way you hoped. The other is unshakable because it was never dependent on their reaction in the first place. James and the cost of being reliable. Let me tell you about James, because his story shows this same principle playing out somewhere. Many of us overlook not romance, but work and family. James was the eldest of 3 siblings, and for as long as anyone could remember, he had been the reliable one. When his parents needed help moving, James came. When his sister needed money for a car repair, James transferred it without a second thought, and without ever being paid back. When family gatherings needed organizing, James booked the venue, coordinated the schedules, sent the reminders. He was, in every sense, the load-bearing wall of his family, invisible in his function precisely because he performed it so consistently. His younger brother, Theo, by contrast, was inconsistent, often unreliable, frequently late or absent. And yet somehow, James noticed with a quiet, corrosive resentment, Theo's rare appearances were treated like gifts. When Theo showed up to a birthday dinner 20 minutes late, their mother beamed and said, "You made it!" When James showed up early, having spent the morning setting up chairs and running to the store for ice, no one said anything at all. His presence had become furniture. For years, James told himself this was simply the price of being dependable, and that dependability was its own reward. But Seneca warns against precisely this kind of quiet self-erasure, the belief that virtue requires you to accept being unseen. Virtue, for the Stoics, was never about disappearing into usefulness for others. It was about living in alignment with reason and self-respect simultaneously. A man who allows himself to be endlessly used, without ever voicing his own worth, is not practicing Stoic virtue. He is practicing quiet resentment, which curdles over time into something far uglier than honest anger. The breaking point for James came at his father's 70th birthday. James had spent 3 weeks organizing the event, venue, catering, a slideshow of old family photographs he'd spent nights scanning and restoring. Theo arrived an hour late, empty-handed, and was met at the door with hugs and relief. Later that evening, James overheard his mother telling a cousin how lucky they were that Theo had made time to come. No one mentioned the 3 weeks. No one mentioned the slideshow, which had made half the room cry. James stood in his parents' kitchen, holding a stack of dirty plates, and felt something inside him go quiet in a way it never had before. He did not make a scene. He did not deliver an ultimatum at the party. But over the following months, James began, deliberately calmly, to do less. He stopped being the automatic organizer. When his sister asked for another loan, he said, gently but firmly, that he wasn't in a position to help this time. When a family gathering needed planning, he waited to see if anyone else would step up, and let the silence sit, uncomfortable as it was. For the first few weeks, nothing happened, because, and this is important, to say honestly, the world does not always rearrange itself immediately, just because you've decided to stop overextending. A gathering was disorganized and half-attended. His mother called, mildly irritated, asking why he hadn't taken care of the details like usual. James, for the first time in his adult life, said simply, "I'm not able to carry that this time." It took nearly a full year, not a dramatic reversal but a slow, grinding recalibration before his family began, almost without acknowledging it out loud, to understand what his consistent, invisible labor had actually been holding together. His mother started calling him more, not to ask for something, but simply to talk. His father at Christmas pulled him aside and said quietly, "You've always been the one who keeps this family together. I don't think I ever told you that." James didn't need the apology to feel resolved. He had already done the harder, more important work, the Stoic work, of no longer requiring their recognition in order to know his own worth. But their eventual recognition, when it came, was real, and it mattered, precisely because it arrived only after his absence had made his presence legible for the first time. Have you ever been the reliable one, who went unnoticed until you finally stepped back? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear how that changed things for you. The dichotomy of control, why you cannot force recognition. We need to pause here and go deeper into the philosophical machinery underneath these stories, because understanding the why is what will let you actually apply this in your own life, rather than simply feeling inspired for 20 minutes and then returning to old patterns tomorrow. Epictetus opens his most famous teaching, the Enchiridion, with what may be the single most important sentence in all of Stoic philosophy. Some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. Up to us, our judgments, our intentions, our desires, our aversions. In short, everything that is properly our own doing. Not up to us, our body, our property, our reputation, our position. In short, everything that is not properly our own doing. Read that list again slowly, because most people skip over the word reputation without letting it land. Epictetus is telling us quite explicitly that how others perceive us, including whether they recognize our worth, is not within our control. It never was. You can influence it certainly through your actions and character, but you cannot command it. You cannot install it in someone else's mind through sufficient effort, sufficient patience, or sufficient explanation. This is precisely why chasing recognition is such an exhausting, losing game. You are pouring your energy into a category of life that was never yours to command in the first place. It is like trying to control the weather by yelling at the sky. You might feel like you're doing something, but the clouds were never listening. Walking away, in the Stoic sense, is not an attempt to finally seize control of the uncontrollable. It is the opposite. It is the act of releasing your grip on something you were never meant to hold, another person's perception, and returning your attention to the only thing that was ever truly yours. Your own conduct, your own boundaries, your own dignity. And here is the strange paradox that Elena and James both discovered independently in completely different domains of life. The moment you genuinely release your need for someone's recognition, you often, not always but often, become the very thing that finally earns it. Not because you engineered that outcome, but because releasing the need changes your entire posture in the relationship. You stop performing. You stop pleading. You simply exist fully as yourself. And a self that no longer needs approval radiates, a a kind of quiet gravity that approval-seeking never could. This is not a manipulation tactic dressed up in philosophy. It is a genuine structural truth about how human value is perceived. Scarcity reveals value. Constant availability conceals it. And the only way to access that truth without becoming manipulative is to walk away for the right reason, not to provoke a reaction, but because staying in a place where you are undervalued is itself a violation of the respect you owe yourself. Marco and the promotion that never came. Let's move into a third domain most of us don't associate with Stoic philosophy at all, the workplace. Because the pattern we've been describing is not limited to love or family. It shows up with brutal clarity in how careers are built or quietly wasted. Marco had worked at the same mid-sized logistics company for 9 years. He started as a warehouse coordinator and, through relentless quiet competence, worked his way into an operations management role. He was the person everyone called when a shipment went wrong at 2 a.m. He was the one who trained new hires because he explained things patiently and remembered what it was like not to know. He never missed a deadline. He never complained publicly. He simply worked, steadily, dependably, exceptionally. For 3 consecutive years, Marco watched a senior operations director position open up, and for 3 consecutive years, it was given to someone else, twice to external hires with flashier resumes and considerably less institutional knowledge than Marco possessed. Each time his manager would tell him, almost apologetically, "Your time will come. Marco, we just need you exactly where you are right now." It was, he later realized, a sentence designed to sound like reassurance while functioning as a permanent postponement. Marco absorbed each disappointment the way he absorbed everything, quietly, professionally, without visible resentment. He told himself that hard work eventually gets recognized, that if he simply kept proving his value, someone would eventually notice. This is one of the most common and costly misreadings of how organizations and people actually function. Consistent excellence, delivered without friction, is remarkably easy for others to take for granted, precisely because it never forces a reckoning. There is no crisis. There is no gap. There is nothing that demands attention because Marco himself was quietly filling every gap before anyone else even noticed it existed. The turning point came when a competitor reached out to Marco directly, having heard about his reputation through an industry contact. The offer was for a director-level role, the exact title. He had been passed over for 3 times, with a salary nearly 40% higher than his current one. Marco did something that surprised even himself. He did not use the offer as leverage. He did not walk into his manager's office with the letter, hoping to provoke a counteroffer, hoping the threat of losing him would finally force the recognition he'd been quietly waiting 9 years for. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should be sparing in our need for others' approval because chasing it turns us into performers of our own lives rather than authors of them. Marco recognized in that moment that using the offer as a bargaining chip would still be a form of begging, just a more strategic one. He simply resigned. 2 weeks' notice, professionally written, no bitterness in the language, no parting speech about being undervalued. He trained his replacement thoroughly, the way he trained everyone, because that was simply who he was. And then he left. The company did not fall apart dramatically. That is not how these stories usually go, and I won't pretend otherwise for the sake of a tidier narrative. But within 4 months, 3 separate operational failures occurred that Marco would have caught and quietly resolved before they ever reached leadership's attention: a missed compliance deadline, a shipping contract renewed at unfavorable terms nobody had thought to renegotiate, a training gap that led to a costly warehouse accident. None of these failures were catastrophic on their own, but together they painted a picture that leadership had never had to see before, what Marco's presence had actually been preventing, invisibly, for 9 years. His former manager reached out eventually, not to offer him his old job back. Marco had already moved well beyond that possibility. but simply to say with what Marco described as genuine humility, "I don't think I understood what you were actually doing until you weren't doing it anymore." Marco didn't need that call. He had already built a new life, a better title, a company that recognized his worth from the outset rather than requiring 9 years and a resignation letter to see it. But he told me, because Marco is someone I know personally, not just a distant case study, that hearing it still mattered. Not because it changed anything materially, but because it confirmed something. Seneca wrote about the nature of vindication. It is sweetest not when we seek it, but when it arrives, uninvited, as simple truth finally spoken aloud. If you've ever felt like your work was invisible until you stopped doing it, I want to hear that story too. Drop it in the comments below. The danger of walking away for the wrong reasons. Now I want to slow down here, because there is a version of this message that becomes dangerous if we are not careful, and Stoic philosophy, practiced honestly, requires us to be careful. It would be easy to turn "walk away and they'll finally see your worth" into a manipulation tactic, a kind of relationship strategy, cynically deployed, where you withdraw, not out of genuine self-respect, but as a calculated performance designed to provoke a specific emotional response in someone else. This is not Stoicism. This is manipulation wearing philosophy as a costume. The Stoics were exceptionally clear about the difference between virtue and strategy. Epictetus taught that our actions should flow from correct judgment about what is genuinely good, not from a calculation about what will produce a desired outcome in someone else's behavior. If you walk away purely as a tactic, hoping and expecting the other person to come chasing after you, you have not released your attachment to their opinion at all. You have simply hidden that attachment behind a more sophisticated maneuver, and attachments hidden behind maneuvers have a way of revealing themselves, eventually, through bitterness when the tactic doesn't work, through smugness when it does, through a fundamental instability that genuine indifference to outcome never carries. There is also a harder truth we need to sit with honestly. Sometimes you walk away and they do not come back. Sometimes the recognition never arrives. David might never have reached out to Elena. Marco's old company might have simply replaced him and moved on without a second thought. And plenty of former employees in his exact position have experienced precisely that outcome. This is not a story where the philosophy guarantees a satisfying reversal. And this is precisely the point Marcus Aurelius kept returning to, in meditation after meditation, in the privacy of his own journal, written for no audience but himself. Your task is not to secure a particular outcome. Your task is to act rightly, according to your own reason and character, regardless of what follows. If recognition comes, let it come as a welcome consequence, not as the reason you acted. If it does not come, your walking away must still have been correct, because it was rooted in self-respect, not in the hope of a reaction. This is the deepest, hardest, and most liberating teaching in this entire video. Walk away because staying has become a betrayal of yourself, not because you are trying to win. If you can genuinely arrive at that place, not perform it, not intellectually agree with it while emotionally still hoping for the text message that proves you were right, something remarkable happens. You stop being hostage to outcomes you cannot control. And paradoxically, that is exactly when you become hardest to overlook. How to actually walk away, a Stoic framework. Let's make this practical, because philosophy that cannot be applied is merely decoration. First, separate the decision from the desire for a reaction. Before you walk away from anything, a relationship, a job, a friendship, a family dynamic, ask yourself honestly, am I doing this because remaining here violates my own dignity and values, or am I doing this because I am hoping it will finally make them see me? If the honest answer leans toward the second, pause. Not because your pain isn't valid, it is, but because a walking away rooted in hope for a reaction is fragile, and it will collapse the moment the reaction doesn't come, or comes too late, or comes in a form you didn't expect. Second, make the decision privately before you make it publicly. Elena did not announce her departure with an ultimatum. James did not deliver a speech at the birthday party. Marco did not brandish his competing offer as leverage. Each of them made the decision internally, fully, before external circumstances forced their hand. This matters because a decision made calmly, in private clarity, carries a different weight than a decision made in the heat of an argument. The Stoics called this prosauche, attention, or mindfulness, the discipline of examining your own judgments before acting on them. Third, do not narrate your departure as a performance. There is an enormous difference between walking away and announcing that you are walking away in order to be seen walking away. If your exit requires an audience, a dramatic speech, a public declaration designed to make the other person feel guilty in front of witnesses, you have shifted from dignity into theater. Seneca advised that the wise man does his most important work quietly, not because he is ashamed of it, but because genuine conviction does not require applause to sustain itself. Fourth, do not check the door behind you. This is perhaps the hardest discipline of all. After you walk away, the temptation to monitor, to check if they've noticed, to see if they've reached out, to track their reaction through mutual friends or social media can be overwhelming. But every glance back is a small betrayal of the very release you just practiced. Epictetus would say that checking the door behind you reveals that you have not actually let go of the outcome. You have simply relocated your attachment to a more distant vantage point. True walking away means genuinely redirecting your attention toward your own life, not toward monitoring theirs. Fifth, build, don't wait. Elena took up painting again. James reinvested his energy into his own life rather than his family's constant management. Marco built a better career elsewhere entirely. None of them sat in the aftermath of their decision, waiting passively for vindication to arrive. They used the space created by walking away to build something genuinely their own. This is crucial because a life spent waiting for someone else's recognition, even after you physically walked away, is still, in the deepest sense, a life still tethered to them. The final act of walking away is filling the space you've created with something that belongs entirely to you. Sixth, accept that recognition if it comes. Changes nothing about your worth. It only reveals it. This is the philosophical anchor beneath everything else. Elena's worth was not created by David's eventual regret. Marco's competence was not created by his old company's operational failures after his departure. Their worth existed the entire time, fully formed, entirely independent of anyone else's awareness of it. What changed was not their value, it was the visibility of that value to people who had grown comfortable not looking. Do not make the mistake of believing that someone else's recognition is what finally makes you valuable. It never was. It only makes their previous blindness undeniable, even to them. Tell me, which of these 6 principles do you find hardest to practice? I read every comment, and I want to know where you're struggling. The ones who never come back, and why that's still a victory. We need to address the version of this story that doesn't have a redemptive ending, because pretending it doesn't exist would make this entire video dishonest. Some people walk away and the other person never calls, never reaches out, never sends the message admitting what they lost. They move on, sometimes quickly, sometimes without any visible reckoning at all. If your entire sense of resolution depends on that call coming, you will spend years in a kind of suspended waiting room, checking a door that may never open. This is where Stoic philosophy offers something more durable than a satisfying plot twist. Marcus Aurelius, in one of his most quietly devastating meditations, reminds himself that very soon he will have forgotten everyone, and everyone will have forgotten him. Fame, recognition, even vindication, all of it dissolves eventually into the same silence. If your peace depends on someone else's eventual awakening, you have built your peace on a foundation you do not control. The deeper victory, the one that does not depend on anyone else's phone call, is this. You stopped abandoning yourself. in order to be chosen by someone who wasn't choosing you back. That is the whole victory, complete, entire, requiring no external confirmation. If recognition comes later, it is a pleasant addendum to a decision that was already fully correct. If it never comes, the decision remains exactly as correct as it would have been with an apology attached. This is genuinely difficult to accept, especially in the raw early days after walking away, when the silence feels less like peace and more like a held breath, waiting for a phone to ring. I won't pretend that difficulty away, but Seneca, writing to a grieving friend, offered something that applies just as well here. Time does not heal by making us forget. It heals by teaching us to hold what happened without it controlling what comes next. The ache of walking away without vindication softens, not because you stop caring, but because you build a life substantial enough that the absence of their recognition no longer occupies the center of it. The full circle. Let's return to where we started. An empty chair at a dinner table. A phone face down, gone quiet. That silence I described in the opening seconds of this video, it is not, in the end, an absence. It is a message, delivered without a single word. It says, I was here. You had every chance to see it. And now I have chosen myself instead of waiting for you to choose me. Elena did not walk away to make David regret her. She walked away because staying meant slowly disappearing inside a relationship that treated her presence as inevitable. David's eventual regret was real, but it was never the point. It was simply what happens reliably when constancy is finally replaced by absence. The mind, forced to notice what it stopped noticing years ago, finally does its arithmetic. James did not stop organizing his family's life to punish them. He stopped because carrying an entire family's cohesion silently, invisibly for years, was quietly hollowing him out. His family's eventual gratitude mattered, but his own dignity mattered first, and mattered regardless of whether that gratitude ever arrived. Marco did not resign to teach his company a lesson. He resigned because 9 years of being told your time will come had finally, honestly, run out of runway. The operational chaos that followed was not his revenge. It was simply the truth made visible once his quiet excellence stopped absorbing it. This is the thread that runs through every Stoic teaching we've covered today. Your worth was never something you needed to prove, earn, or wait for someone else to certify. It existed the entire time, in your patience, your competence, your integrity, your quiet consistency, whether or not anyone was paying attention to it. Walking away does not create that worth. It simply removes the noise that was letting someone else look past it. Marcus Aurelius wrote near the end of his life, exhausted by war and grief and the endless demands of an empire, that a person's worth is measured by the things they set their heart upon, not by what others say about them, not by what others eventually admit too late, in a quiet phone call or a birthday toast or an operational review. Set your heart on your own integrity, your own reason, your own quiet excellence, and the recognition of others becomes what it always should have been, welcome if it comes, but never necessary. If you have been staying somewhere, a relationship, a family role, a job, hoping that enough patience will finally make someone see you, I want you to sit with the question this video has been circling. From the very first frame, what would happen if you stopped waiting for them to notice and simply chose yourself instead? You may never get the phone call. You may never hear the words, I didn't realize what I had until you were gone, but you will get something far more durable than an apology. You will get yourself back, fully, without needing anyone's permission, to know your own worth. If this video meant something to you, if some part of Elena's story, or James's or Marco's, felt uncomfortably familiar, I want you to do 3 things before you go. First, tell me in the comments, is there someone or something you've been staying in only because you're hoping they'll finally notice you? You don't have to share the details. Just naming it, even to yourself, is the first Stoic discipline, prosoche, honest attention. I read every single comment on this channel, and I promise you, you are far from alone in this. Second, If this video gave you something to think about, hit like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear exactly this, at exactly the right moment in their lives. And YouTube's algorithm listens closely to that signal. And third, if you haven't already, subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics and turn on notifications. Every week we take philosophy that has survived 2,000 years of scrutiny, and we hand it to you as something you can actually use. Not as a decoration for your bookshelf, but as a tool for the exact life you're living right now. Because the truth Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus and Seneca all understood, each in his own way, is this: the people who overlook you are not doing so because you lack worth. They are doing so because your presence has become too comfortable, too guaranteed, too easy to take for granted. And the moment that guarantee disappears, the moment you finally, quietly, walk away for good, is the exact moment they are forced to see, clearly for the first time, exactly what they had. Until next time, this has been Wisdom of the Stoics, ancient wisdom for the modern mind.